Today's webinar on the use of individualized learning plans to help students be college and career ready. I'm Betsy Brand, Executive Director of the American Youth Policy Forum. For those of you who are unfamiliar with AYPF, we provide professional learning opportunities for national and state policymakers and practitioners to learn about what works to help young people be successful. We cover issues such as secondary school reform, college and career readiness and success, dropout prevention and recovery, after school and expanded learning time, and youth development. Our focus is on the students who face challenges to success, such as those who are disadvantaged, students with disabilities, foster care youth, immigrant youth, and youth involved in the court system. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to provide a few logistical points about the webinar. In the event of any technical difficulties, you may dial 1-800-263-6317 to reach GoToWebinar's technical support line. Also, if you happen to lose connectivity, please just go ahead and log back into the webinar. At any point during the webinar, you may type a question for our presenters in the questions box on your screen to the right, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. Please be sure to identify if the question is for a particular panelist. Also, this webinar will be recorded, and the audio portion with all the slides will be posted on the AYPF website, and we anticipate that this information will be posted by Thursday afternoon, May 30th. Also, when you exit the webinar, you will receive a very brief online survey about the webinar and its value to you. I encourage you to take a few moments to fill that out and send us your feedback, as it helps us improve our programming. I also want to mention that AYPF will be hosting a webinar on Monday, June 24th, in partnership with the College and Career Readiness and Success Center at AIR on competency-based education and implications for state policy. During the webinar, speakers will highlight current efforts across the country to use competency-based education and to identify promising practices and helpful resources for states. Presenters will include Kate Nielsen, who's a policy analyst at the National Governors Association, Diane Smith, is Director, Teaching and Learning Initiative with the Oregon Business Education Compact, Sandra Dopp, Consultant for 21st Century Skills with the Iowa Department of Education, and Carissa Miller, Deputy Executive Director at the Council of Chief State School Officers. More information about this webinar on June 24th is on the AYPF website. And lastly, I'd like to announce that AYPF is now on Twitter, so you can follow us at AYPF_tweets, which is on the first slide on your screen right now. So now on to today's webinar. AYPF is very happy to be co-sponsoring this webinar with the College and Career Readiness and Success Center at AIR and with the Institute for Educational Leadership. Today's webinar will focus on the use of Individualized Learning Plans, or ILPs, which provide middle and high school students with a tool to define their personal interests, goals, and course choices to prepare for post-secondary education and careers. Many states have adopted policies requiring the use of ILPs, and research is starting to show their benefits. The Center for Workforce Development at the Institute for Educational Leadership has conducted longitudinal research funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy to assess the effectiveness of ILPs, and it also implemented a demonstration project to better understand their impact on post-school outcomes. Our presenters today will summarize research findings and discuss their experiences implementing and scaling up the use of ILPs. At this time, let me briefly introduce our presenters in the order that they will speak. First, we will hear from Dr. Joe Harris, who is the Director of the College and Career Readiness and Success Center at AIR, and that's the successor to the National High School Center. Dr. Harris will speak briefly on the work of this new center. Next, we will hear from Dr. Scott Solberg, who is Associate Dean for Research at Boston University's School of Education, and he is also a professor in the Department of Counseling and Human Development. Dr. Solberg conducted the research on ILPs and will provide an overview of the key findings. Following Dr. Solberg, we will hear from Dr. Sabrina Moore, who is the Director of Student Intervention Services for the South Carolina Department of Education. She will be followed by Misti Ruthven, who is Manager for Post-Secondary Preparation and Success in the Colorado Department of Education. And both Sabrina and Misti will discuss how ILPs have been supported through state policy, resources that have been provided to schools and districts to help them adopt the use of ILPs, and impacts on students. Our final presenter will be Mindy Larson, Senior Program Associate, Center for Workforce Development at the Institute for Educational Leadership. And Mindy will discuss recommendations for the use of ILPs by various stakeholders and mention numerous resources to aid in the implementation and use of ILPs. We will have time for questions at various points in the program as well as at the end, so please be sure to type in your questions in the box to the right on your computer screen. So at this point, I would like to turn the microphone over to Dr. Joe Harris, our partner at the College and Career Readiness and Success Center at AIR. Joe.
Thank you, Betsy. We too are pleased to co-sponsor this event with our colleagues at AYPF and the Center for Workforce Development at IEL. The College and Career Readiness and Success Center is one of 7 federally funded content centers and 15 regional comprehensive centers that provide technical assistance to state departments of education in their respective districts and schools to promote school turnaround. Next slide, please. The center serves as a technical assistance hub that collaborates with other federal TA centers and the CCRS external resource provider network. We also develop new products and tools, collect and vet other CCRS resources, and sponsor webinars and other events such as this. Next slide. Our priorities for the current year include helping others navigate the increasingly complex CCRS landscape, easing post-secondary transitions, and PK to post-secondary and workforce systems alignment. So the topic of today's workshops is very germane to our current and planned work. In closing this introduction, I want to, next slide please, I want to invite you to visit our website at ccrscenter.org and to subscribe to our social media outlets. I'll be brief in this introduction so that we can get to the exciting presentations that will follow. You can also find the copy of this webinar on our website as well as AYPF. Thank you, Betsy.
Super, thank you, Joe. And your resources are really phenomenal, and I encourage those who are listening today to take a moment to check out the College and Career Readiness and Success Center's website. Just a host of fabulous resources. So now we will turn to Dr. Scott Solberg from Boston University, who will talk about his research on ILPs. Scott?
Yes, great, thank you. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to present in conjunction with Joe Harris and the great work that's going on at the College and Career Readiness and Success Center. Our work, and you can go to the next slide, the work that we've been doing in really focusing on the nature of individualized learning plans and whether they should be considered a promising practice is coming through this National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth. As Betsy indicated, it's been funded through the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. And really their focus is around how do we support all youth in making a successful transition from school into post-secondary as well as employment settings. Next slide. And what they're about is really this larger collaborative. These are some of the partners, just a few of the partners that they work with, but these were the ones that have been instrumental in our research, and just wanted to make sure they got a bit of a shout out as we go forward. Next slide. The Office of Disability Employment Policy was quite struck by the fact that there were 20 states many years ago in an Education Commission of the States report, 20 states who were mandating that all students would have an individualized learning plan, when at the time there was really no research or other kinds of context to really understand how and why this was occurring. And they were really interested in, so not only knowing is this something that's a positive outcome, but also how are students with disabilities faring in this process. And so at the end of the day, our purpose was to really study the nature of ILPs and to really look inside and see whether there was some promising practice that we could glean out of that experience. Next slide. And over 6 years now, we've conducted a whole bunch of research studies, from focus groups to interviews. We've had surveys, we've had visits, we've had professional development, a whole host of things. We've even redone the Education Commission on the States report, looked at all 50 states, found out that actually now we're up to 35 states and probably more in the next couple of years that have either mandated or strongly encouraging the use of ILP. So it's something that's continuing to grow. Go ahead to the next slide. And so just to kind of get a sense then of what we've come up with, and the first is, what does a quality ILP, what is it about? And the first thing that we really took to heart was that we have to separate the document from the process. So a document, the actual, what does an ILP contain, is certainly a career goal, course-taking patterns, post-secondary plans that are aligned to that career goal, as well as documentation around other kinds of college and career readiness skills. So if they're in leadership activities, if they've done work-based learning, if there's certifications, these all together kind of put this picture of an individual who's becoming and growing towards employability, or what now we would call becoming career ready. So the key piece here then is that the student is defining a career goal, and that really brings down to the point that the ILP is as much or more a process than it is a content or a document. The process is, how do we provide access to students to help them engage and become more involved in self-exploration, career exploration, and career planning and management activities. Next slide. There we go. So putting it together, we also want to focus no longer on just saying, do we provide access, but are they building a set of skills? Do they have self-exploration skills that they can actually look at themselves, their information, and say something about their skills, values, interests, that can then point towards the careers that are aligned with those interests, skills, and values. So career exploration skills is, how do I go out and look at the world of work, labor market information? How do I go about making those decisions about what's possible? And then career planning and management are all those other employability skills. We can call them soft skills, we can call them social emotional learning, resiliency. There's a whole bunch of names they go under, financial literacy. We call them career planning and management skills. So it's a whole range of others. But again, not so much that you have access to learn, but have you shown and demonstrated that you have these skills. Next slide. Something that comes up a lot is the similarity between the Individualized Learning Plan, which is again for all students, and then the Individualized Education Program, which is specific for students with disabilities. And we know that there is a transition IEP that the federal government has mandated that all youth need to go through at some point in high school that have an IEP. And what we have found is that if you look at it from a document perspective, they're very similar. So in a transition IEP, you need to have some kind of goal. What's my post-secondary goal that I want to do? And am I starting to look at how I'm going to go about getting there? And then we need to align different learning opportunities in the present to help support the successful matriculation into that post-secondary goal. And that post-secondary goal is, across all of this, could be a training program, it could be a 2-year or a 4-year program, but some kind of additional development we know is needed for other reasons that are economic and career development focused. But what we are finding as well is that this is not the same process. So when you call the ILP and you focus it more on as a process, the transition IEP is mandated to occur once a year. What we're finding as a promising practice is, in fact, that the ILPs are occurring really in whole school implementation 2 to 3 times a week in many schools. And so what you're getting then is more engagement in the process than you would get with the IEP, the transition IEP process. Next slide. Just a couple of things, again, showing that they're very similar, again, in what they look like, but different in terms of process. Next slide. So what are we finding as we look at this? The key when we went out and did our first set of focus groups, we did 52 focus groups with families, with educators, and with students, all done separately. And there was an overwhelming support that the ILP was a very powerful tool for helping students define their career goals as well as their post-secondary plans. And that these students were now coming out with a sense of relevance of why they were in school. We had students who were at risk for dropping out saying, I decided not to drop out because of the ILP process. We had students who were doing okay say, you know what, I decided to take AP courses because now I realize here's what I want to do. Subsequently, we've had state officials say that they're finding more students with disabilities choosing a more regular education curriculum and choosing the regular diploma track because they now have goals at the post-secondary level that they need to align their developmental experiences with. This was amazing. We had principals telling us that they could hear about ILPs at the football games, that the parents were all talking about them. Parents were explaining that they had better relationships with their students. Students were saying that they had better relationships with their family. That's an amazing thing to think about, that you would hear these reports, and we've heard them over and over and over. Something about having conversations about their life course really brought together the family in a new way. Teachers or families reporting that the school was amazingly powerful in supporting their child in ways that they had never known. So we know that there are some things that are going on, and some of the characteristics that they came up with, as you're seeing on here, as we've already indicated, this idea of the career goals, the post-secondary planning, identifying the course-taking plans that align to that. You also have this idea of the regularity. So in talking with students that got it once a quarter versus students that got it too much, it came down to about 2 times a week as a regular activity, often in an advisory type period, is being used in the most beneficial way, seemed to have the big impact. But to do it successfully, it took whole school implementation. And so all the educators were breaking down into small groups. Many of those were actually working with those students throughout the 4 years of high school. So it was something that was ongoing. It was that caring, mentoring adult that they had access to, and it was something that the students were then evolving each year as they learned they had new skills and new interests. They could go back and reevaluate their careers trajectory. Next slide. In terms of that, I've already talked about, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to skip over this. That's all right. We can come back to more on the IEP and piece in a minute, but I think we hit it up earlier. So again, some of the promising practices as we're going down. We're hearing the state educators as well as district educators saying that for the first time, because of the ILPs, they're working more closely between special education and school counseling. We're hearing at the state level breakdowns across their silos around the different sectors. So the business, the labor, education, voc rehab, all coming together around supporting ILPs, and as a result, looking at new funding scenarios to support professional development, access to online systems. One of the exciting things that came out of it was that the general education educators were actually becoming more engaged and involved in IEP and transition readiness activities for students with disabilities. And were finding themselves to be advocates and wanting to be in the IEP meetings to advocate more effectively for the children they're working with. The annual student-led parent-teacher conference was one of the biggest hits we heard about, where they take the ILP and they present to their family and the teacher what have they learned about themselves, what have they done this year to start moving towards being employable and being someone who's going to be able to enter that particular either post-secondary or employment setting. It was a huge hit, and we found that, in fact, participation rates in high schools were reaching 100% in more than one case, and rarely below 90% of the parents participating in this process. To do it effectively, though, it needed the whole school involvement in ILPs, because school counselor ratios were just too large to be able to handle that kind of attention. So in schools where there is only one person who's assigned to ILPs, the quality of that student-led parent-teacher conference was much lower in subsequent interviews we did. They just felt like they called it speed dating as opposed to a real in-depth thing. So the student-led parent-teacher conference is an exciting thing, but it has to be done in an in-depth way. Increased access to transition assessments is exciting. We're finding states, they're finding ways to work with students with disabilities, especially significant, to figure out how to get some of the assessment materials to them. We're finding that this is also a problem. So some states have found a way around it. Other states are struggling with that. And then another thing that came out is really the use of electronic career information systems that have an e-portfolio attached. This has been a very important piece because it allows the ILP to move with the child as well as to provide access to home. And it's accessible in a way that they're constantly going back and redoing. It's not like a piece of paper in a cabinet. When we first started working with our schools, there were some who had electronic and some who didn't. And in our providing them with an electronic option as part of the grant, we were able to hear from families and students and teachers what that meant to go from paper to electronic. And it was clear that the electronic system was an important resource for the schools to use in this process. Next slide. So just very briefly then, in terms of what this looks like, and I'm just going to go through a couple of slides on some of the data on this, but one is that, you know, when you talk about a student who's got these characteristics, in this case self-determination, this is a career, becoming career ready, you can talk with them, and just in the conversation they're going to tell you what their plans are, they're going to tell you what they can do to pursue them, they're going to give you their backup plans, they're going to tell you the volunteer and the work-based learning experiences they're doing, and this will happen in a very short conversation if they truly have had opportunities with the ILPs to really crystallize a goal. Next. When we talk about educators, this is now a big survey we did with the 4 states we're working with. Some interesting results, especially as we start looking at the difference between students with disabilities versus not. And we know we've got some additional issues to look at. Yes, it's a good approach. It's helpful generally, but we're seeing some discrepancies. And what that's telling us is that we need more professional development to help educators work more effectively or feel more confident in their work with students with disabilities. Next slide. Just a quick quote, just one of these for the teachers. Loving it, love it, success. Makes the courses and curriculum more relevant. They understand why they're taking algebra, why they're taking biology, which is exactly what we hear echoed over and over and over, is that sense of relevance that increases. And what we're also hearing is that it makes it easier to teach. That when there's a student focused on learning, it's easier to get the content material to the student, and that they see the ILP as making that happen. Next slide. So let's skip this one. So we have reactions from families. Here's a situation where families, again, are feeling generally they're involved, they're happy about it, but we see a discrepancy now between students with disabilities and students without. And it's certainly an area, how do we help the child become more of an advocate in directing their own life course? The ILPs promise to do that, but when we see the parents' perception, yes, they're involved, but they're not yet taking that leadership. So we need some additional work here to figure out how we can get over that piece. Next slide. So just a quote now from families. I like this because I think it explains why the relational base really improves between the parent and the child, because we're really focusing on them as adults, growing into adulthood. We're not focused on their test scores. We're not focused on what they're wearing, how late they get home at night. We're focusing on them as an emerging adult and having a conversation with them at that level. Next slide. So then, some of the conclusions we have about this process. One is that we really needed to start in middle school as opposed to high school. And in all the schools we've worked with, they agree that if the student comes in with this process in place, the transition into high school is better. We need the online career information systems and access. Some states are providing access to all students. Others are trying to find ways of leveraging funding so that districts can afford it, but that is an issue, that if schools do not have this ability to have access to an electronic portfolio, it definitely really reduces the quality of the ILP experience. We're emphasizing 3 processes, and we're talking about them now as skills rather than access to career development. How are we facilitating the development of self-exploration, career exploration, and career planning and management skills? We have a how-to guide that's online with the National Collaborative that actually provides all kinds of free access materials that go into each of those 3 areas, so you can see in more detail what those kinds of, what one can do within those different areas. We've also mentioned the idea of the whole school buy-in, and the advisory periods is a major piece of promising practice. And we believe that that without whole school buy-in, it also limits the full power of what the ILP can be. And then, as we indicated, the student-led parent-teacher conferences. So I'm going to go ahead and end there, and I think there was some time for a couple of questions.
Yes, Scott, thank you so much. That's a great presentation about the findings on the effectiveness of ILPs and promising strategies for using them. And it's great to know that there's such a strong evidentiary basis for this strategy in helping youth be prepared for college and careers. We have had a number of questions come in, so I'm going to take a few moments to ask Scott some clarifying questions. So I think, Scott, it would be useful, we had a question about whether ILPs are for all students or just for students with disabilities. So would you address that for the audience?
Mm-hmm. So the ILP is actually for all students. This is something that is now being connected with the college and career readiness, not necessarily mandates, but certainly the initiatives that are going on at the state level that we're all going to graduate college and career ready. It's aligned with the idea that we need to create a more personalized learning environment within the middle and high school, that part of the dropout cycle is one of disengagement. And they look at the ILP as a way of re-engaging students and also helping the school manage the developmental needs of the students more effectively by having the student drive some of that conversation. And then it's certainly part of this idea that we have stronger academic standards and expectations going on. And so we need students to be aware of what it's really going to take out there in the world of work. If they want to go into a post-secondary degree, we need them in middle school to know what kinds of math and science will be involved. And so the ILP becomes a method to be able to support that awareness and understanding, both among the student and the family. So it's definitely a whole school, all students involved. But it does get complicated, and we have a couple of states that have opted out for students with disabilities out of the ILP because they have the transition IEP. But that's the rarity. For the most part, it's all students. And in the states, like when we talk about Colorado and South Carolina, like you're hearing about today, these are states that value it for every one of their students.
Great, thank you. We've also gotten a number of questions about the e-portfolio and how you can access that or what the systems look like. So what did you learn about the e-portfolio strategies and systems in your work?
Yeah, so the e-portfolio is kind of it's a placement concept. It's in all of the career information systems. And so first, be clear, the federal government is not advocating for any of these commercial systems, but they're out there and a lot of your schools are using them. So between Naviance and Career Cruising, between the WIS Careers, the career information systems that are going out of Oregon, there are a huge number of systems that are out there, and each of them have an electronic portfolio feature. And many of them are basically now using the language of ILP. But when you look at the documentation, what's being held in those electronic portfolios are all of these information points. So they are readily available. They are and they're mostly commercial vendors that have those. There is an ONET system that provides at least access to the career development services or activities that's going to be federally funded and publicly accessible. But it's usually these more for-profit and some nonprofit organizations that have these systems in place that are for that schools purchase into.
Okay, thank you. And one final question, Scott. What role would parents play in the development of an ILP, and what about the role of students themselves?
Yeah, so the ILP is first of all student-driven, right? So it's the student who makes that definition. They're the ones doing the exploration. There's a caring adult who processes with them, provides encouragement, and also looks out for ways that they can continue developing along whatever career trajectory they want to move into. The most exciting part, and this also comes in with the electronic portfolio, is the students have access, if it's an electronic system, night and day. And so there's ways to include the family involvement. The parent-teacher conference that we described, when the student-led parent-teacher conference, that's oftentimes one of the first entry points that parents have seen, at least initially. But once they realize this is possible, they want to be more involved. They want to be with the student. They want to look at the assessment. They want to talk about it. And what's exciting is now there are ways to leverage this process so that we can focus on it as a family and student-driven process, not just the individual student.
That's great. And I thought I was going to let you off the hook, but we've been getting a lot of questions about the actual research that you conducted. So just real quickly, how many students, schools were involved in the research, and which states did you study as well?
So the original research, we had 4 states. It was Louisiana, New Mexico, South Carolina, and Washington, the state of Washington. We started with 14 schools within those states. We had a sample on our survey, when we did our initial survey, about 1,650 students. We were able to do actually a large qualitative study. Thank you, federal government, for helping us hire the grad students. But we did analysis of 1,600 career, open response to open-ended questions. We've also done quantitative path analyses and things, testing some hypotheses and theories. It was with those 14 schools that we've done the focus groups. With the 14 schools, we also did a follow-up set of interviews with students with disabilities. We also looked at a follow-up with the teachers and families. That's the data you just saw today. That followed up with that and got over 1,000 responses from families, hundreds around the educators. So we felt good about that. They were selected originally because we felt they had some promising practices. This was very new at the time that we started looking at it. Many of these states were trying to figure out what to do and how to do it as well. And so we were also providing technical assistance and supporting them in their design. And then we went off from that. We went to the 50 states, looked at everybody's policies. We found 8 states in addition to our 4 that we thought were just emerging. Colorado today would be one of those 8 states. We went back and interviewed their officials to really find out more in depth what they were getting out of the process. We're finding incredible sets of materials, and so we've written about that. And we've developed a policy brief based on those conversations that really highlights what some of the promising practices and challenges are, but then advice for what we think the different, what states need to do, districts, what we need to do as families to help support families in it, professional organizations, etc.
Super. And we'll make sure that access to those resources is provided through our website. So thank you, Scott, for a great presentation on the research on ILPs. Now we're going to move to hearing from some state leaders. So our next presenter is Sabrina Moore, who's Director of Student Intervention Services in South Carolina Department of Education. And she'll talk about how South Carolina has been using ILPs. So Sabrina, you're up.
Thank you, Betsy. In South Carolina, and I'm going to sort of organize this according to your slide here, we're going to talk about how we were attempting to achieve increased connectivity between academic and career readiness. We're going to talk about our Education and Economic Development Act, which is the key piece of legislation that sort of got the ball rolling in South Carolina. We're going to talk about individual graduation plans, and in South Carolina, that's what we call our ILPs. We call them IGPs. And then we're going to look at the relationship between the IGP and an IEP, and then we'll provide some resources. So next slide. In 2005, South Carolina General Assembly passed the Education and Economic Development Act, and it was sweeping reform in that every school in our state is mandated to implement the components of the Act. On average, this legislation is funded at approximately $29 million, and I'll show you a breakdown of that in a second. And then, of course, the focus is on integrating academic and career education into a unified system for all students, beginning in kindergarten and then going through post-secondary education. So in pre-K through 5 elementary schools, the emphasis is on career awareness. So we've encouraged schools to move beyond the proverbial college fair where you have the doctor. I used to say the career fair where you have the doctor, lawyer, and the Indian chief. And we've seen just significant improvements in career awareness. within our elementary schools. In middle schools, we look at that as our opportunity for career exploration. And so students get more involved in career assessments. You get into some work-based learning experiences. And primarily there, we're talking about job shadowing experiences and some virtual job shadowing experiences. Now, in the 8th grade, that's when students are required to have an individual graduation plan conference, and it is via that conference that an IGP is developed. In the 8th grade, every student is required to select one of the 16 career clusters, which he or she is going to focus on, during his or her high school career. And then in grades 9 through 12 in high school, that's when we really move into career preparation. You get more intensive work-based learning experiences. You get some reassessments in terms of career as well as academics. And then we actually work with a lot of our businesses to increase the number of internships that are available. I think another thing that is key to what we're doing in South Carolina is that the Act emphasizes dual enrollment and offering students opportunities to get college credit. And then we move on to the post-secondary, and hopefully the goal is that because students have had this academic and career experiences from K through 12, that when they get into the college arena, they are less likely to continue to chase their majors. We don't have any research to support that yet, but we're working on our data collection system to get some of that information. And then we understand that some students will not choose to go to college, either 2-year or 4-year, and they'll go right into the workforce. And so we look at this opportunity and this comprehensive reform as just ways for students to determine early on a path that is more appropriate for them. Next slide. So the key requirements of the Education and Economic Development Act. Every high school in South Carolina is organized around a minimum of 3 of the 16 career clusters. Now, it is important to say that every district, we have 85 districts, so every district in our state has to have a career center. And so that was a foundational piece that had already been established. The Act requires that the student to guidance personnel ratio, as close as possible, gets to be 300 to 1. And we'll see why that's so important in a second, but it goes back to what Scott said earlier, is that if we know that if these individual graduation plan conferences are going to be successful and yield meaningful IGPs, then guidance personnel have to have enough time to work with students on an individual basis. I think right now our ratio on average for student to guidance personnel is probably closer to 350 to 1. The Act requires that a certified career development facilitator be in every middle and high school. And of that $29 million, $21 million of state, these are all state dollars, $21 million have been allocated for this certified, what we call career specialists or career development facilitators. And those are the individuals who are really the most responsible for infusing or integrating the whole career component into our students' lives. And the individual graduation plan conferences for all students, and we'll talk about that, right? Whether or not a student has an IEP is irrelevant. All of our students are required to have individual graduation plan conferences, and those conferences are mandated to occur annually. So beginning in the 8th grade, through that student's high school career, a student is required to either develop and or revise his or her IGP on an annual basis. Next slide. Evidence-based initiatives to address the needs of at-risk students. Now, of that $29 million, again, $21 million goes to guidance personnel, salaries and benefits, and then $3.5 million is set aside for the evidence-based initiatives. Every high school in our state is required to have an evidence-based model implemented to serve the needs of students at risk of dropping out and/or those students at risk of not graduating on time. So the underlying premise of the EEDA is, yes, to advance academic and career readiness, but it's also to assist us in decreasing our state's dropout rate and improving our state's graduation rate. I would like to say that when we've tracked the students who are involved in some of the EEDA-sponsored evidence-based initiatives, and for 3 consecutive years, the dropout rate for those students is less than the dropout rate for the state, and so we're really pleased with the success of our at-risk initiatives. Increased parental involvement, and we'll see that more clearly in a second. And the idea here is that because the IGP conferences have to be led by a school counselor, and a parent or parent designee or guardian are expected to attend, or parents and designees are expected to attend. We've mentioned the opportunities for dual credit, and we've seen the numbers of students engaged in courses for dual credit. That number has increased steadily. And so, again, another one of the byproducts of the implementation of the Act. And then career preparation opportunities for all students. Next slide. So more specifically on the individual graduation plan, and again, I want to echo Scott, the document is not as important as the process. So it is the conference that underlies all of this. And we know that, as in most cases, some individuals will perform their task more successful than others, but we believe by and large that the fidelity of the conferences is maintained because we put money into it in terms of state dollars. We do ask that all of our certified school counselors and career specialists complete an annual accountability report. And again, we give them the benefit of the doubt. And then we're going to talk about the electronic system in a second. But it is required for all students in grades 8 through 12. It captures the decisions about the direction in which the student wishes to go in high school and after high school. Next slide. That individual graduation plan specifies for 8th graders their cluster. When students get into the 10th grade, they have to select a major. They identify their post-secondary goals. They actually plan their high school schedule. Now, initially, this was a problem in some of parents' minds and some of educators' minds, because they'd say, well, how would you expect an 8th grader or a 9th grader to know his or her career plans? And I think they've been pleasantly surprised that a number of students in 8th and 9th graders at least have some good ideas as to what their career goals are. We typically emphasize that we know that students will change their minds, and so the requirement is that this plan is reviewed annually, but it certainly can be reviewed more often than not. So if the student decides, I think I better change my mind, then that student meets with his or her counselor, and that plan is revised. Okay, so it's reviewed at least annually, and again, beginning in the 8th grade. And then finally, in terms of the characteristics, the IGP is flexible. I mean, any part of that IGP can change. And so I think that sort of gave parents a bit of satisfaction to say this is not set in stone. So my child might have said that he wanted to go into health sciences. However, in 11th grade, my child might decide that he was going to go into information technology, and the student has the right to do that. Next slide. This is just an example of our electronic IGP, I will say at this point that South Carolina has a statewide student information system, which means that every school in our state is using the same student information system, and all of those data then come to the Department of Education. So in developing our electronic IGP system, which we call the IGP Success Planner, we contracted with a vendor who worked closely with our IT persons here at the Department of Education and developed a system that is integrated with the Success Planner. So on this Success Planner, you'll see that we have courses in grades 9 through 12. I'll point out that if you look at 9th grade English, that 87 is the student's grade. And so what that means is that as a parent, when I go into my student's conference, I'm aware if my child is a junior, I have a reminder of the grades that my child earned in his or her freshman and or sophomore years. I see those courses that are required to graduate. I see the electives. And by the way, a major is considered 4 courses taken for elective credit that support a particular major and cluster. So on this slide, you'll see that the student's cluster is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and then that student's major is engineering. And so you'll see some courses like Design Foundations 1, Digital Technology, and those would be courses that would support that student's major. When that student completes 4 of those courses, then that student earns a cord or a stole for having completed one of his high school majors. Next slide. And you don't have to go back, but on that previous slide, we saw that the student said that he or she is planning a 4-year four-year institution as post-secondary plans. And then in terms of the bottom part of this slide, I just want to show you again that the student signs, the counselor signs, and the parent or guardian sign. In the system, parents can sign electronically, and so that's been a real big plus this year. Parents do have access to their students' IGPs through the parent portal if those parent portals are activated in every district. So if my child were in the 8th grade and I wanted to see what he or she was doing, I would simply log into my parent portal and pull my student's name. I see that I keep track of who attended, who participated in the conference, and then I see who the conference was conducted by. And then you'll see at the bottom of this that this student plans to go to either the University of South Carolina or the College of Charleston, and the student plans to be a physician. Next slide. Just kind of want to give you a summary of some of the IGP data. Because this was a statewide system, the state has access to all of the data. So for the past several years, we've always gotten at least 98 to 99% IGP completion rates. In 2011-12, 99.1% of our students statewide had an IGP. Now, that discrepancy happens because sometimes students are in transition when the data are pulled. And so we miss a couple, but we are confident that 99% of our students have IGPs. Next slide. You remember one of the components of the Act was to increase parental involvement. Now, if you see the blue represents a parent or guardian participation, I guess it looks orange on my screen, represents another representative, and then no representation. So you can see that in 8th grade, we had 82% in 11-12. 82% of our 8th grade students were represented by a parent or a guardian or another representative. That figure gets less and less, but on average, statewide, we've been averaging about 75 to 78% parental involvement for the past 4 years. Next slide. And I'll just go through these slides fairly quickly. Just the post-secondary plans by grade. So you'll see that the majority of our students consistently indicate that they're planning to enroll in a 4-year institution. Next slide. And then for the past 4 years, the cluster of choice selected by students, and this is across grade level, the cluster of choice has been health science, and then that's followed by the arts and audiovisual technology, and then the STEM cluster falls behind that. Next slide. Just this information, because I do think we try to gauge every year how, I mean, are these conferences working? Are counselors finding them beneficial? Are they beneficial to students? And so these numbers have been consistent. Counselors, and if you'll see here this year, and this is current data, we've had over 800 counselors to complete the survey, and 88% of those counselors have said that this conference is beneficial in helping students understand the relationship between academic progress and career goal, and that's one of the goals. And I think the other slide is that 90% of the counselors say that these conferences are helpful to parents. And we think that's critical. And so when we talk about some types of anecdotal information, I know counselors have said to us, wow, we didn't realize some of the struggles that some parents go through. You know, wow, this parent is so proud to know. And so it's interesting to see that the impact of these IGP conferences has been very, very profound. Next slide, we'll see some, I think, student information. We asked, is this conference helpful? And we gave you the numbers for very helpful and helpful. So roughly 81, 82% of the students, and you'll see there this year we are actually about 9,000. I guess we're probably about 8,000 to 9,000 students responded and said that the conference is at least helpful to very helpful. You'll see similarly in terms of career planning that 80% of students said that the conference is very helpful when it comes to career planning. I think the best comment that I've received from students over the past 4 years is from the young man who said, and I'm going to quote him, and I wrote the quote down because I thought this was so critical. He said, I don't think, no, let me read. He said, I think this is the first time that I felt like my mom really understood who I am. And we thought that was profound because we recognize now that students and parents are talking. And then the next slide comes from parents. I'm going to skip to the last question on here. Would you recommend that other parents or guardians attend an IGP conference with their children? I always pick out this slide because I think this is the most profound. If I, as a parent, am going to recommend something to one of my friends who have children as well, I have to believe that it is beneficial. And 93% of parents have said they would recommend this conference to their children. I'm sorry, to other parents. Now, this is the first year we've done this survey online, so we only had 332 parents. But last year when we did a mail out, we had 1,400 parents to participate in the survey, and these numbers were again high 80s. I think it was 88% of parents said they would recommend. So we talk about success, I'd say yes, the conferences are very meaningful for the development of an IGP. And then next slide, and I'll be wrapping up. So IGP and IEPs, all students, diploma and non-diploma students are to be included in IGPs because that's what the law mandates, even through some form of alternative assessment. As with the regular IGPs, they have to align the career goals in the student's course of studies. One thing we emphasize here is just about the practicality of the IGP, IEP. And then it must be approved by a certified school counselor. Next slide is the one I really want to focus on right now. The next slide. We encourage counselors to schedule all students with an IEP during the same time as the IGP conferences. In a lot of instances, the IGP conference is done simultaneously with the IEP, and because we don't want that separation. I mean, because there's so many, as Scott indicated, there's so many similarities between an IGP and an IEP, so we don't want to suggest that there have to be two independent documents. One thing that South Carolina has mandated, though, is that our counselors cannot serve as the IEP team leader, so then the counselor become a member of that IEP team. And then in closing out, Next slide. I want to talk about some resources that we have. We put EEDA under the heading of Personal Pathways to Success because we believe every student has a personal pathway. And so this is the homepage of the department's website that allows counselors, students, parents, adults, and business leaders to delve more into some of the additional resources. We have, for businesses, we have our cluster selection from students because businesses are often interested in that. For adults, we have some information regarding GED and things like that. And then parents, students, and counselors. Next slide, and going to kind of wrap this up. South Carolina has through our state library system, we have a portal that has numerous resources, and all of these are free resources to our students. So by logging on to Discus, our students and their parents can get information, have access to the Ferguson Career Center, Learning Express, ebooks, numerous resources. Next slide. And then that's just additional information. I want to point out on the right side of your screen that even through our DISCAs, that information about financial aid for students with disabilities, we provide information for students who said, I'm not going to go to college, I'm going to go straight into the military. And so the resources is just a huge array of information for all types of students in all types of situations. Next slide. And then I think we're going to just wrap it up here. So you can go to the next slide. The South Carolina Career Information System, again, just another of those resources that puts information right in front of the students' faces. And these are all free resources. And there again, all of these resources are linked to the South Carolina Department's main page. And then the final resource is and this is huge for us. Microburst Learning is a South Carolina company. And what Microburst Learning has done is to create virtual job shadowing experiences, and these are 20-minute plus experiences that delve into a career, I think, in each of the 16 clusters, and that's the goal. And so again, these are resources that students have free access to, and at the end of the virtual learning experiences, students are quizzed so that we can get a better understanding of their level of understanding about their particular careers. And so I know this was really quick, but I'm going to wrap this up and say the fact that it was state legislation was critically important into successful implementation. Thanks, Betsy. I'm done.
Oh, Sabrina, thank you. That was a great presentation, and it's exciting to see all the work that's gone on in South Carolina, and thanks for sharing all the resources. They will be part of the material on the website, both at AYPF and at the College and Career Readiness and Success Center, so people who are interested can go back and look at the slides and get more information. So thank you again. Now we're going to hear from Misti Ruthven, who is the Manager of Postsecondary Preparation and Success in the Colorado Department of Education, and she's going to tell us about Colorado's experience using their version of ILPs, which they call ICAP. So, Misti, you're on.
Thank you, Betsy. And thanks to South Carolina. I won't spend a lot of time on our general ICAP framework because it is very similar in many ways to South Carolina's. Again, thank you to AYPF and AIR for hosting this webinar. As Scott mentioned, Colorado is an emerging state when it comes to our ILP or ICAPs, the individual career and academic plans. We'll briefly talk about goals, post-secondary workforce readiness, or PWR for Colorado, which many states call career and college ready. Then we'll talk a little bit about our policy framework. We'll get into, very briefly, implementation. And then we'll talk about a recent needs assessment and environmental scan that we did regarding ICAP recently in our state, and some preliminary findings from that. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to Colorado, we have 178 school districts, and we are a local control state. So we have about 850,000 students in our K through 12 system, and about 30% of those students are in high school. 40% of our students are economically disadvantaged, and about almost 40% of our seniors took an AP exam, and 22% received a 3 or higher. We have about 61% of our our high school graduates go on to college. So that tells you just a little bit about our state. As far as our counselors in our state, right now our student counselor ratio is right around 400 to 1, a little bit higher than that. We don't have additional funding in our state for ICAP implementation. We do offer several statewide resources that we'll talk about briefly, but again, we don't have additional funding specifically for ICAP implementation. However, we do offer small grants to districts and schools that are in high need to have an additional licensed school counselor at their school to help and assist with things such as ICAP implementation. So let's talk a little bit about the goals, our statewide goals. As you can see, next slide please. As you can see that post-secondary workforce readiness is embedded in our statewide goals here at the Department of Education. So we know that this is a focus. We know that this is a win if districts as well as our schools are part of this conversation. One of the things that Scott mentioned earlier that this work has really done is brought together folks in our state that haven't always traditionally had this conversation. So really creating that P20 platform here in our state. So bringing K-12 to the table, bringing higher education to the table, workforce, labor, and career and technical education. So really, this has given our state an opportunity to have the conversation and for everyone to really have some skin in the game. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about our post-secondary and workforce readiness. So this is the joint definition that our State Board of Education and our Commission on Higher Education adopted in 2009. In 2009, our state legislature passed the law that essentially brought ICAPs to districts and schools in our state, our individual career and academic plans. And what that said is that we would begin implementation, and 2012 was the first full academic year that all seniors in our states, the expectation is that they would have graduated with an individual career and academic plan. Again, really, the way we're able to make this work in our states is through joint resources, resource creation from the various folks and stakeholders and partners that I mentioned previously. Next slide, please. Another piece that I want to make sure and reinforce is the idea that there are many tools in the toolbox for career and college readiness or post-secondary workforce readiness. And this is one of the conversations that we're really purposely having in our state at the district level, at the school level, and as well as at the state level. Because as many of your states do, I'm sure, you have lots of programs going on all at once, and how do you put those together for the best outcomes for the students and to really match the student's individual needs? So one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure and draw your attention to this slide is because individual career and academic plans touch every piece of every program that is on this slide. So if a student wants to pursue concurrent enrollments, then the individual career and academic plan, or ICAP, really outlines what that journey looks like. It gives an opportunity for that student to then connect that with their plan of study. So really, again, reinforcing that these are not pieces of the pie, that they're part of the whole. Next slide, please. So let's briefly outline the policy framework for post-secondary workforce readiness in our state. One of the trends that we've really seen here in Colorado is that individual career and academic plans, or ICAPs, are utilized as a vehicle now, or as a tool for implementation of other programs. We talked about concurrent enrollment as an example, and that students must have a ICAP and a plan of study clearly outlining their journey within that current concurrent enrollment participation. Additionally, our State Board of Education recently passed graduation guidelines in our state. One of the big things that this is going to do is it's going to push ICAP implementation down to 6th grade. Now, I mentioned previously, I believe, that 9th graders through 12th graders are anticipated to have an ICAP. So this is really continuing to change the landscape here in Colorado by starting that conversation early, because we know that 6th or 7th grade is a key time for students to be able to see the relevancy of the work they're doing now with what their future might look like, and have that conversation within their parent and family structure. Next slide, please. You'll see some of the goals here that Colorado has identified as being directly pertinent to connecting with the ICAP. So we know, again, that students who identify their career interests and identify the relevance of what they're doing now and how that connects with their future, that they're much more likely to stay in school, right? To understand why go to biology, I think was on a previous slide, or why to take algebra. A few of the lessons that we've learned so far are that when we initially implemented ICAP in Colorado, that it's really important for administrators, for counselors, for teachers, for folks at all levels of leadership and administration at a school to have buy-in of the process and about what's going on. Because they're the connectors, right, that are going to assist parents and students in exploring their career and post-secondary opportunities. We also know that counselors must be supported in this work. In partnership with higher education, in partnership with the community college system here in Colorado, we have given no fewer than about 2,000 trainings on this topic in the last 4 years. But we know that there's more to do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide, please. So we mentioned that we're just finishing up the 2nd year of our implementation journey, a full implementation for our ILP or ICAP here in the state of Colorado. So again, we're emerging, we're new, and one of the things that we're taking away from this is that we're now taking a snapshot of where we are within our implementation process, appreciating where our current level of implementation stands, and then really identifying those targeted interventions for how can we help counselors, how can we help districts, how can we help schools to in turn serve their parents and students. Next slide, please. We know that ICAP and implementation, I think Scott said, right, to really disconnect a little bit the process and the journey of ICAP from the document itself, right? Because we know targeted interventions, targeted counseling, having that purposeful conversation with the parent, with the student, with the family, that might be that ICAP is then a way to capture that information, but ICAP is not just sitting a student in front of a computer without some of those intentional conversations around that. So again, 85% of school counselors list ICAP implementation as a priority in our state. Some of the limiting factors to full implementation is lack of funding. Again, we mentioned that there is not funding for ICAP implementation in Colorado. Turnover in administration. We know leadership buy-in is critical, that there needs to be consistent, very consistent support for our counselors in this work. And again, you know, just general lack of administrator understanding from current folks. Next slide, please. So again, the recent survey that we talked about, or needs assessments, we wanted to get a snapshot of counselors and where they thought ICAP currently is in our state as far as implementation. Again, we're an emerging state, we're new to this work, so we wanted to say, you know we have more work to do, but let's really acknowledge where we are. One of the good things, the exciting pieces that came out of this and that you'll see on this slide is more than 50% of our schools are currently implementing ICAP at 9th grade or in lower grades. So as we said, with graduation guidelines implementation in Colorado, this is then going to push that down into 6th grade. Next slide, please. One of the things that Scott mentioned was being able to implement across disciplines and have meaningful implementation for students and counselors, right? So we know in our state, in Colorado, that the majority of implementation, the burden of implementation, is falling on school counselors. We hear from our most successful schools and districts, they've trained custodians and bus drivers how to have intentional career and college conversations with their students. And that it's not just about, again, sitting the student in front of a computer to go through their ICAP, but it's about having those intentional conversations and changing the fabric of that culture to have the conversation with that student. Next slide, please. So the exciting thing, with less than 2 years in, we're at 83% with partial or full implementation of our districts. And we've identified about 17% of our districts that need very targeted implementation assistance. One of the things that we've done, again, in partnering with with higher ed, is we are looking at some of our Ask a Model experts across the state and asking them to engage at the school and district level in helping with implementation, because we know sometimes it's a training opportunity as far as a training issue. Maybe there's folks that need additional professional development assistance, and sometimes this is a capacity issue as well. Next slide, please. So we talked about the cultural buy-in and how critically important that is to really embed this in the fabric and the culture, not just have it be one more thing that's happening in that school or district. So consistently, we know in our state that there's about 4 or 5% of folks that really haven't gotten on board, but considering, you know, that there's not direct incentive dollars, we're optimistic about the future and what this holds. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do offer is a free state e-portfolio that all districts and schools can access for implementation of ICAP. We also have targeted materials around milestones and indicators that we're happy to share, sample plans of study. But again, we recently identified within our needs assessment that one of the things our districts and schools are craving is universal information to share with parents in order to engage them earlier in the process. So to briefly wrap up as far as takeaways, I would say that we know that the ICAP work has incented stakeholder partnerships and collaboration. It's really allowed each one of those partners to own a piece of the work. We know that counselors believe that ICAP has value as a planning tool and to show students relevance beyond high school. And we know that we need to further incent leadership and administrator support, and that the process is even better if it's spread across disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you, Misty, so much for talking about the ICAP in Colorado, and it's great to see the progress that you've made in a little over 2 years. So that's very exciting. So I want to take just a couple minutes to pose at least maybe one question to Sabrina and Mindy, because so much of this work relies on capacity building and professional development and training. So just real quickly, and Mindy, Misty, I'll start with you. What if you had to give advice to a fellow state leader who's implementing ILPs either as a brand new state or has had them for a while, what's the most important area of capacity building professional development training that you would suggest that they take on? And then Sabrina will turn to you.
Sure. So one of the things that I think we did well here in Colorado was training for counselors and some administrator training. One of the things that would have been highly beneficial, would have been training for teachers as well as direct buy-in for upper level administrators. And one of the other pieces that we're now going back and doing and connecting from a policy perspective is really embedding ICAP in other reports and policies across our state, so that necessarily wasn't done initially.
And Sabrina?
And for South Carolina, I think, as Missy said, when the legislation was first passed, we did this all-out effort across the state to first train or to share the information with district superintendents, because remember, this is a mandate. And so we made this conscientious effort and a concerted effort to make sure that every superintendent in the state had an understanding of what this act entailed. And then after the administrators were trained, we spent a lot of time and continue to spend a lot of time talking with school counselors. It is critically important to know that this legislation was divided into several components. So we had 6 committees made up of businessmen, higher education reps, teachers, principals, people here at the department. And so those individual committees pretty much laid out the plan for us to address with counselors and career specialists. But now I will say, and this is what I was going to say earlier too, is that the group that I think we would definitely want to engage more strongly next time, if we were to do this again, would be the teachers. There is a component of the Act for, educators in training, so all of our colleges of education are familiar with the Act, but I don't think we ever went down to the teacher level, the classroom teacher. We've tried to correct that by offering teachers opportunity for externships where they go into businesses and really get the feel of what a business environment is like, in this particular century. But I think that whole notion of professional development has to be continuous, and it has to be inclusive of teachers.
All right, thank you both, Sabrina and Misty. Now we're going to turn to our final speaker, Mindy Larson. Mindy, thank you for being patient. Mindy is the Senior Program Associate with the Center for Workforce Development at the Institute for Educational Leadership. And Mindy is going to tell us about some of the recommendations and resources available to help promote the use of ILPs. So Mindy, you're on.
Thanks, Betsy. I'm really happy to just take a few minutes to share some information. I am with the Institute for Educational Leadership, and we house the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth, and Scott Solberg, who presented earlier, is our principal investigator on the research on ILPs. Since we've concluded that research, we've developed a policy brief, and so I'm going to just share a few slides that highlight some of the recommendations from the brief, and then let you know where you can find the brief as well as other resources that we have on ILPs. So next slide, please. Our recommendations for promoting quality ILP implementation start with issues related to providing, oh, I'm sorry, one more slide. There we go. Our recommendations start with issues related to providing sustainable leadership. And our recommendations in the brief talk about actions for states, actions for districts and schools, as well as actions for national organizations. At the state level, we recommend that state leaders bring together the various agencies and departments, as both Sabrina and Misty have talked about in their states, bringing together folks from across agencies and departments to collaborate on designing, implementing, and continuously improving the ILPs with a focus on promoting quality. And the states have an important role to play in developing common messages and communication materials around the purpose of the ILP and the rationale for ILPs as it relates to the variety of efforts around secondary education and school improvement. So communications is a key state action as well. At the district and school level, we recommend that leaders focus on building buy-in for school wide implementation so that ILPs cut across the usual silos and engage the various departments and staff in different parts of the school, not just school counselors, but also general educators, special education professionals, career and technical education staff, all working together towards the common goals of career and college readiness for all students. And then at the national level, we're encouraging organizations that states and district and school staff are typically a part of, the different associations for education professionals that come together at the national level can help to support work across the states on common issues such as the technology needs for implementing ILPs, developing accountability systems, and providing training for staff and evidence-based resources. Next slide, please. Another group of recommendations focuses on setting standards and measuring results. For states and districts, we recommend developing a logic model that focuses on defining the benchmarks at each grade level so it's clear for all involved what competencies the students should be gaining from the ILP process and activities. And then the standards need to be coupled with accountability measures to document how participating in ILPs is supporting college and career readiness and other post-secondary outcomes. South Carolina provided some really clear examples of how they have measures, both quantitative and qualitative data measures, including counselor, student, and parent surveys that are helping to capture what's happening and what impact it's having on students, parents, and staff in the schools. Another recommendation has to do with working with the vendors of the career information systems to make sure that there are quality expectations about what the career information systems and the e-portfolios can do, including making sure they have valid and accessible assessment tools, making sure that the activities in these systems focus on developing skills in all three areas of career development, and making the e-portfolio a portable tool so that as students leave a school or leave a district, they can still access that information. And also as they leave secondary school, they could access it going on to post-secondary and employment. And then again, the national organizations play an important role in helping states work together on looking at voluntary standards of practice for agencies that are doing career development both in and out of school, and also in defining what common measures should be used for evaluating the return on investment of ILPs. Next slide, please. There are three capacity development issues discussed in the ILP policy brief, which are developing staff competencies, developing the career information systems, and providing evidence-based resources for ILP activities. It's clear that quality ILP implementation requires engaging a variety of school personnel, not just school counselors, to facilitate the career development of the students. So all of these various professionals need some training and professional development, and we recommend focusing training and professional development on evidence-based career development strategies that include strategies for self-exploration, career exploration, and career planning and management, which are the three areas of career development that we propose really make up a quality ILP experience and career development opportunities for all students. Schools in our research study also expressed the need for evidence-based curricula and materials for implementing ILPs in the school day or in counseling sessions. So we responded to this by creating an ILP how-to guide, which is available on our website, and we'll share the link at the end of this presentation. But we recommend that states and districts look at what resources they can recommend in terms of evidence-based strategies that professionals in the schools should be using to facilitate the ILP activities. Next slide, please. There's a lot of concern about making sure that implementation of ILPs includes students with disabilities, including students with the most significant disabilities. And in our research, we found that while there's some strong efforts across the country to be inclusive of all students, in some places, students with the most significant disabilities still aren't participating. So we recommend looking closely at how states and districts can align the ILP content and the IEP process to provide guidance and technical assistance for the schools as well as the families on why these two processes why they both matter and how they can complement each other, and how to embed the ILP content in the IEP. So one of the recommendations that we make is to create district and school task forces that focus on accommodations for the ILP participation, so that students with significant disabilities are less likely to be excluded because of a concern around accessibility or the need for doing something outside of the sort of standard practice. And if states and districts start by designing their ILP processes according to universal design principles, then from the get-go, all the activities and the career information systems and materials can be made to maximize accessibility for all students. So starting with the universal design, and then also still looking at what additional accommodations may be needed is an important practice. And then in some places we found that there are some exclusionary policies out of concern for the accessibility of ILP activities or the online systems, and we strongly encourage states and districts to re-examine any policies that are allowing students to be opting out, and instead look at ways to promote inclusion of all students, ways to make accommodations or different alternative strategies for participation. Next slide. And finally, we have some recommendations related to promoting family engagement in the ILP process, and this includes one of the things that Misti mentioned was the need for family-focused messages and materials to make sure that the families understand the value of the ILP process and how to get engaged. We recommend involving parent advocacy groups, either state, local, or national organizations that have parents that are led by parents who can provide guidance on how to reach families and how to explain the value of ILPs and how they can participate with their children in the process. We also recommend providing guidance to the schools and the staff on how to effectively engage families in ILPs, with a focus on some of the strategies that we've seen used well across the country, including student-led parent-teacher conferences and providing parallel activities that families can do at home. And in some cases, we've seen states have or districts have career information systems or e-portfolio systems that have a family section so that families can get involved even at home in both looking at what their child may be doing around the ILP activities online, but also themselves working, contributing to the ILP online through having their own family or parent portal in the system. And then our final slide is just point you to the resources that we have on ILPs. So as I mentioned, we recently published the policy brief, and I've provided the link to that here. And we also developed a how-to guide on promoting quality individualized learning plans that's focused on activities and strategies that districts and schools can use at the high school level for implementing ILPs. We also have an ILP fact sheet which can help to explain in some basic terms what ILPs are and how states and districts are using them. And then all of these and more resources can be found on the ILP homepage, which is the last link provided there. Thank you all for this opportunity to share a little bit about our policy recommendations.
Mindy, thank you very much, and appreciate the resources. I'm just going to leave this slide up for the next minute or so. I can't believe that we raced through 90 minutes on this, and we are just kind of scratching the surface on how to effectively use and implement ILPs. There was so much great information provided by all the speakers. We will have as many links to the materials referenced today on both our website and the website at the College and Career Ready Center, and we encourage you to either get in touch with AYPF or one of the other presenters if you want to follow up. At this point, I just want to thank all of the speakers and for all the time that they put into their presentations. You all did a wonderful job and provided really, really important and valuable information. I just want to remind the listeners that all of this, the audio and visual materials will be posted on the website tomorrow afternoon. And please do remember to complete the pop-up survey as you're leaving the webinar. And finally, thank you to the audience for joining us today for this webinar on the use of individualized learning plans to help students be college and career ready. Thank you very much for joining us.